All right, we're back. And so we have three main kinds of ways of delivering training: the traditional, the technology based, and the employee development based approaches. So let's jump in. So the traditional approach is kind of what I'm doing right now, lecture. Um, these are economical and quick. I mean, lots of research has suggested that in college classes, lectures are not as effective as other approaches like hands on learning and other kinds of things. Nevertheless, students like lectures because they're quick. You can get a lot of information in a small amount of time, right? So it's quick for the learner. It's economical for the organization to use lectures because it takes less time to convey the information than to pay your employees to read it or to watch it as a video or something that might have some fluff in it. Lectures are quick. The effectiveness varies greatly. It depends on what you're teaching, whether it makes sense to use lectures. I think one of the reasons why we see lectures so often in things like social sciences is because we have a lot of facts to convey, the accumulated knowledge of our field to convey. We don't have a lot of classes where the focus is problem solving or developing interpersonal skills or something like that. In those kinds of classes where that's the kind of topic, it makes a lot of sense to use another approach. And so lectures are really great for conveying information. Wow, that's shocking. You're going to have to just write that one down, I guess. What tends to be missing when we use the lecture approach is opportunities to practice the information, to practice it to overlearning, for example, and then to get feedback. The learner may have a very dramatic misunderstanding, but it's in their head because the lecturer is lecturing. So we don't know what's in that learner's head. So those are some problems with lectures. On the job training, this is the most widely used of the traditional approaches. This is where the new employee basically shadows a veteran and learns the job through watching how they do the job. The problem is, of course, it relies really heavily on that veteran employee to display good protocols, right? You're really trusting that employee is going to follow the right steps and show this new employee the right steps, right? Another problem with it is that it's not a carefully planned training program. And so it can vary dramatically depending on who's on shift when the new person's there that now I'm going to place you with to get your job shadowing training, right? It's not very consistent. There's a lot of variability in the effectiveness of the on-the-job training based on a lot of variables. Self-directed techniques are, maybe I give you the manual, right? And I instruct you to go through the manual, and maybe there'll be a quiz at the end, but you go through it at your own pace. And I give you maybe 90 days to get through it and have to take the test and, the probationary period, something like that. Maybe I give you a bunch of videos to watch. My son used to work for Fry's Electronics, and when they had new hires, they spent their entire first day watching training videos on different aspects of the job. They just sat in the break room and watched instructional videos, self-paced. Generally, the instructional materials are developed based on, basic learning principles. So that's an advantage. It's got some kind of structure. We're trying to attract your attention to the key points, got a goal in mind. So usually the self-directed techniques are pretty good on that score because they were developed with this mindset. When the learner is motivated to learn what they're processing, it can be really efficient. Watch the materials, read the materials, whatever. This can be really efficient if they're motivated. If they're not very motivated, they might not even get through all the materials, especially if the self-pace is a really long, date in the future, because that's something I can read, I'll read it in a couple of months. I've got 3 months to do it. Next thing you know, you didn't leave yourself enough time and I wasn't motivated to do it and I didn't want to. And so you never got the material done. So that's a big risk with self-directed techniques. Virtual reality training, I'm leaving this in the traditional approach because there are certain fields where they've been using virtual reality style training for a really long time, like pilots, right? They've had flight simulators forever. Truck drivers, they have driving simulators. So a lot of jobs have had virtual reality. So I don't mean necessarily putting on the headsets and now you're, doing whatever, Beat Saber or whatever game you play on virtual VR headset. I'm talking about virtual reality. So the goal in virtual reality training is that the simulator would be as realistic as possible so that the trainee will be able to very easily transfer those skills when they get into the real situation. This kind of training is really best for those situations where it's a very dangerous job and you better really know how you're doing it before you enter into the real situation, right? I don't really think it would make a lot of sense if you went directly from classroom training on how to be a pilot to actually flying a plane. Like that seems a little risky. You know, there's on small planes, they don't do simulators. They have an instructor with you, and you both have all the instruments and things that you need if something happens. Kind of like when you took driver's ed, maybe you had the teacher next to you and he also has a steering wheel and a brake, things like that. So, I mean, it's possible to make it less dangerous on some of these situations, but you can imagine how costly it would be to have people flying 747s or whatever with a trainee and his instructor, and this is the first time they've ever flown. Like, it just seems like unnecessarily risky and maybe costly, right? Why are we flying a 747 to practice on? Do they even make 747s anymore? To practice on when we could just be in the simulator and it would cost a lot less money. These virtual reality situations need to have as much physical fidelity. So fidelity means loyalty. So it needs to be as loyal to reality as possible. So the flight simulator needs to have all the same knob switches, displays, and beepers and all. It needs to vibrate. It needs to do all the things that you would expect in a real situation in order for the person to believe they're really in the real situation. And then it needs to have psychological fidelity. You want to have the feelings of stress, the feelings of pressure. You want to have those same things happen because we need to push you in these dangerous kinds of situations. They do this for surgeons also. They have them practice on simulated situations. You want to put them under pressure. Maybe what appears to be blood starts to come out, or you hear all the alarms going off that the heart's in trouble or whatever. You want it to be as real as possible so that they can have the psychological effects also, so that they can learn to do the job even though they're under these stressors and things like that. So virtual reality training is awesome. It just needs to be as similar as possible to the real job. Now, on that bottom one, I called it VR training on purpose because in that bottom one, I added in a little bit of data on there are jobs that have been using VR headsets to train employees who are doing physical tasks like building something or interacting with the environment in some way. And so they're doing it in the VR headset instead of doing it in the real world. And what they're finding is that being in a VR headset for too long is giving people headaches. Those things are kind of heavy, so it could be because of that. It could be because it doesn't look quite right and your brain has to get used to it. I'm not sure what factors it is, but a longer training session with a VR headset on is not probably the kindest thing we could be doing for our employees. So it's not the solution. A lot of people think, oh, this is going to be the great solution. We'll just put them in a VR headset and they'll have all the training that they need. We can put them in all the scenarios, all the things will happen. And it's actually like exhausting for the trainees, and they end up not learning as much as a function of that. All right, so those were our basic traditional approaches to training. How about some technology-based ones? I know a VR headset is clearly technology-based, but what I mean by technology-based is stuff like, oh, look at this old-timey, oh, do you guys even know CD-ROM, a floppy disk? Those are the old audio-visual training methods where they would send you home and you're supposed to watch the DVDs, or you're supposed to listen to the stuff that's on the CDs, or get on your computer with the floppy disk. And they find that these kinds of delivery methods where it's something recorded is just as good as a live lecture for learning. In fact, you might agree with this as you're taking an online class, and maybe for some of you, this is your preferred modality, because a lot of people like these recorded lectures. You can stop, you can go back, You can, if you did start daydreaming for a second, you can always go back and hear what you missed. I know I daydream all the time when somebody else is talking. I daydream while I'm talking, honestly. So people who are trained using these methods oftentimes report that they're more interested in this compared to some of the more traditional methods, and they tend to experience more satisfaction with the training than some of the more traditional methods. Distance learning, again, you're just going to have to memorize what these are. So, of course, delivering to different locations at the same time. Of course, with modern technology, we now can do like live streams, Zooms, these kinds of things. Of course, for most organizations, cost is a really big factor in how they decide to deliver training. And if you can have one instructor in one place and then learners at all of your plants that are around the world, let's say, or around the country, all taking that class simultaneously, you've got one instructor who you didn't have to pay for them to travel. You don't have any of those problems. You have one instructor, multiple locations simultaneously, very efficient, huge cost savings. The learner shows responsibility for their own success, which a lot of times causes them to actually remember things better because they're invested. And so there's a lot of benefits to doing that method, and a lot of organizations are doing it. For example, this one that you are currently taking a class from. E-learning, again, something that obviously you know about. This is where maybe it's not going to just be a live stream or something like in the distance learning, but instead it's what we're experiencing in this class, the asynchronous kind of online learning where you do it. At work, you might do it literally at your own pace. In school, generally, we're talking about you're doing it in your own time with deadlines, right? And some employers will do it with deadlines also. One benefit of internet-based versus the audio-visual, which are hard copies of things, is that you can update the internet-based material really easily. I always like to call it, I'm 1984ing you, right? Where that old George Orwell book where the government would go in and just change the old textbooks because it needs to conform to what is now happening. And so anytime I make a change in a live class and I just fix it, I always feel a little guilty, like Big Brother has just changed your content. But it's a benefit of this method. I can just change things. Ideally, it happens between quarters, not in a live class, but that's an advantage over the recorded audio visual materials. It's convenient for everybody. It's convenient for the people who put it up. It's convenient for the people who consume it. You can have discussion groups. In some circumstances, discussion groups make a lot of sense. Research is suggesting that this method of e-learning for particularly in employee settings as opposed to school settings is that e-settings might actually be more effective than classroom-based settings, that people actually may benefit from the fact that they have this kind of flexibility and things like that in the their own learning circumstances and not being sitting in a classroom or something like that when you're an employee. The combination of distance and e-learning is the dominant training method in the U.S. right now. Wow, that's surprising. You guys will just have to memorize some of these fascinating facts I'm telling you because they're just so shocking. But, right now, most organizations are going away from a lot of the traditional methods and trying to go more towards these. Now, if we want to get really exciting and maybe we want to really boost community and we really want the employees to know each other and maybe know people at other sites or something like that, we can do more blended learning where we add some amount of in-person interaction, some kind of like maybe once during the training course or something, everybody gets together in one room. Now that I think about it, maybe not even in one room, maybe in Zoom or Teams where we're all there synchronously, and then the rest of it is recorded or something like that. So there's lots of different ways that you could blend it. All right. I really wanted to get through this part before I broke, so I'm going to keep going because I had already planned out my goal. So the employee development-based approaches, we have orientation training and new employee socialization, which is where we're helping that employee to figure out the culture of the organization. And that is it. That's all we're trying to train. So a lot of times it's orientation, just sort of like how we do things here. New employee socialization. Hey, meet the crew. This is your opportunity to meet the people you're going to be working with, kind of thing. It's not a formal content per se, but just more like getting oriented. Coaching is a strategy where, supervisors, I'm thinking it could also be other, maybe more incumbent employees. It doesn't have to be a supervisor necessarily, but they're going to advise and develop goals for improving performance for this new employee or for a person who's recently been promoted into a new position. And they provide guidance, facilitation, inspiration, role modeling, things like that to help the person to be able to achieve their goals within the organization. Behavior modeling kind of builds on that idea, right? Where, we have training that is focused on whose behavior should you be focusing on, who is a good model for you for success in this organization. We can train the modelers. You are a designated model. I'm taking a training course right now, and they have incumbents, or let's say alumni of the training course that they've matched us up with to serve as our mentors, right? So, and they're supposed to be modeling and supporting us, coaching us through this training program. Business simulations and other employee development-based approaches where the manager gives a brief introduction of a fictitious company's background, situation, organizational problems, organizational goals, and then the manager is then asked to give solutions. So this is a business simulation is usually used for people who are going to be managers or who are managers in the organization, and we're helping them to develop their decision-making skills in the context of our organization. Most business programs, by the way, have simulations as part of courses that you take. But the point here, because we're expecting managers to have had business training, the point here is that the goal is not just how you're solving the problem, but how you're solving the problem through the lens of how our organization wants these problems solved. Another employee development-based approach would be these corporate universities that have popped up, like Hamburger U, and GE has one, Motorola has one, Caterpillar has one. And so these are corporate-run, basically training facilities that are going to help to foster people to become managers or, move up in the organization so that they can then transfer that information on site once they're in that position. So dedicated training programs that are helping to develop those employees into more within the organization. All right, yay, I got through the parts. I forgot about this part. Okay, yeah. There's a special kind of coach called an executive coach. And that's somebody who specifically works with executives, helping them with the exact things that we were talking about in the slide. All right. I got through what I wanted to get through. Let's come back and talk about training evaluation next.